The CEO asked the beautiful girl, "Why do you need a job?" She replied, "My mother is dying." Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we begin, I just want to ask, how are you, truly? How is your heart? How is your home? I don't just tell stories. I carry you with me. You are my family and I care deeply. If you're here, please drop a heart or say, "I'm here," in the comments. Like this video too, so I know my voice is still reaching the ones I love. Now, from my heart to yours, here's a gentle prayer. May peace return to you like a long-lost friend. May strength rise within you even when you're tired. May your family be safe, your soul be calm, and your days touched by grace. You are never forgotten, you are deeply loved. Let's begin with love always. The 63rd floor of Rankin Tower commanded a view of Manhattan that made most visitors pause in reverence. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawled below like a glittering chessboard, but today Joe Rankin noticed none of it. At 41, he'd built an empire that spanned 3 continents, yet lately found himself staring into the middle distance more often than at quarterly reports. "Mr. Rankin, your 3 o'clock cancelled," his assistant's voice floated through the intercom. "And there's a little girl here insisting she has an appointment." Joe frowned, pulling himself from his reverie. "A little girl?" "Yes, sir. Says her name is Lillian. Security tried to escort her out, but she's quite determined." The assistant's tone held equal parts exasperation and amusement. Curiosity piqued. Joe straightened his Italian silk tie. "Send her in." The massive mahogany doors opened, revealing a child so small the handle nearly escaped her reach. No more than 7 years old, with rich brown skin and a cloud of perfectly maintained natural curls framing her face. She wore a crisp white blouse, slightly too big, tucked into a pleated navy skirt. But it was her eyes that arrested Joe. Intelligent, intense, and somehow familiar, fixed on him with unnerving purpose. "Mr. Rankin," she said, her voice clear and practiced. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." She approached his desk with measured steps, her small patent leather shoes clicking softly against marble floors. Joe fought a smile. "You're welcome, Miss Lillian Elizabeth." She extended a tiny hand, which Joe enveloped in his own, noticing a distinctive heart-shaped birthmark at the base of her thumb that mirrored his own. A coincidence, surely. With solemn ceremony, Lillian withdrew a carefully folded paper from her purple backpack and placed it precisely centered. On his desk, Joe unfolded what appeared to be a resume, handwritten in careful, childish script. Lillian Elizabeth. Age: 7 and 344. Skills: organizing, cleaning, reading big words, math through division, very quiet when needed. Experience: helping mum with everything, organizing school supplies, library monitor, twice. The innocence of it might have been amusing if not for the desperation evident in every painstaking letter. "This is very impressive," Joe said gently. "But may I ask why you're looking for work, Lillian? Shouldn't you be in school?" She stood straighter, chin tilted up. "Today is teacher planning day. I take the city bus to school myself, so I know how to travel alone." "That's not what I asked." Her composure wavered briefly. "My mother's light is fading, sir." The practiced words trembled slightly. "The doctors say she needs medicine we can't afford. I can clean, organize papers, anything. My mom says I'm very responsible." Something in her phrasing caught him. Her mother's light. Not health, but light. "Your mother is ill?" Lillian nodded, her brave facade cracking just enough to reveal the terrified child beneath. "She tries to hide when she's hurting, but I can tell. Last week she couldn't get out of bed to take me to school." Her small fingers twisted around the strap of her backpack. I heard her talking to the doctor on the phone about treatments that cost more than our apartment. Joe leaned forward, abandoning his CEO persona. "Where is your father, Lillian?" "I don't have one," she answered matter-of-factly. "Mum says he was like a shooting star. Beautiful, but gone too fast to make wishes on." The poetic description stirred something in Joe's memory, but he couldn't place it. "Please," Lillian whispered, her composure finally breaking as tears filled her eyes. "I'll work very hard. I'm stronger than I look." Joe felt something crack inside his chest. A sensation. So foreign he almost didn't recognize it as compassion. Children rarely entered his carefully constructed world, yet this one had navigated security, assistance, and his own formidable reputation to stand before him, offering her small services in exchange for her mother's life. "Lillian," he said, softly, "I don't hire children, it's against the law." Her shoulders slumped, defeat washing over her face. "But," he continued, "I might be able to help anyway. Where do you live?" She hesitated, clearly torn between hope and the stranger danger warnings all children receive. "It's all right," Joe assured her. "I only want to speak with your mother. Perhaps there's a foundation that could assist with her medical costs." After a moment's consideration, Lillian retrieved a worn library card from her backpack and carefully wrote her address on the back. "We're in apartment 4B, she said, sliding it across the gleaming desk. "Mum will be home at 6. She works at Horizon Gallery and takes photographs sometimes for extra money." Joe studied the address, a modest neighborhood in Brooklyn, worlds away from his penthouse overlooking Central Park. "I'll come by this evening," he promised, pocketing the card. "Now, I'm guessing your mother doesn't know you're here?" Lillian shook her head, looking suddenly younger. "Then let's get you home safely." He picked up his phone. "Ms. Alvarez, please have my car brought around. I'll be escorting our young visitor home personally." The autumn evening wrapped Manhattan in golden light as Joe's Bentley glided through crosstown traffic. He'd left Lillian at her school's aftercare program with the director's promise to see her safely home, her face a mixture of hope and worry as she waved goodbye. Now, as twilight descended, Joe found himself standing before a well-maintained but aging brownstone, oddly nervous. He checked the address again before climbing the worn steps. Apartment 4B's door needed fresh paint, but the small seasonal wreath hanging from it suggested care, despite limited resources. Joe knocked, adjusting his cuffs, a habit from board. Meetings when he felt uncharacteristically unsettled. Footsteps approached and then the door opened. Time stopped. "Yes? Can I?" The woman's polite inquiry died as recognition dawned in her eyes. Extraordinary eyes, the color of amber that had haunted his dreams for 7 years. Devon Elizabeth. She looked different, her once shoulder-length hair now cropped, close to her head, her formerly curvaceous frame thinner, more angular, but those eyes, the graceful arch of her neck, the way her breath caught slightly when surprised, these things remained unchanged. Memories crashed through him, stolen moments. In a garden, rain-soaked confessions, tangled sheets and whispered promises. Joe. His name emerged as barely a whisper. Before he could respond, a small voice called from inside. "Mum, who is it?" Devon's expression transformed instantly from shock to fierce protection. "Lillian, go to your room, please." The little girl appeared, behind her mother, eyes widening as she recognized Joe. "Mr. Rankin, you came!" Devon turned to her daughter, confusion etched across her features. "You know him." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The child's age, her familiar eyes, the distinctive birthmark. "She came to my office today," Joe explained, his voice rough with realization. "Looking for work to help pay for your treatment." Devon paled, one hand instinctively reaching for her daughter. Lillian Elizabeth. Is this true? The girl nodded, defiance mingling with worry. I only wanted to help, Mom. Devon knelt despite what seemed like considerable effort, grasping her daughter's shoulders gently. Sweetheart, go to your room and start your homework. I need to speak with Mr. Rankin privately. Once Lillian had reluctantly disappeared down the hallway, Devon straightened, visibly steeling herself before facing Joe. We don't need your charity, she said quietly, dignity evident in every line of her body, especially now. But Joe barely heard her. He was doing math in his head, remembering dates, seeing with perfect clarity the unmistakable resemblance between father and daughter, the same determined set of the jaw, the identical birthmark, the eyes that seemed to look straight through. A pretense. She's mine, he said, not a question but a stunned realization. Devon's silence was confirmation enough. 7 years, he continued, emotions churning beneath his carefully controlled expression. 7 years, Devon, a daughter I never knew existed. His voice cracked slightly. Why? For a moment, Devon's composure wavered, revealing the exhaustion and illness she'd been hiding. She leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking every bit as fragile as Lillian had described. You should go, she whispered, but the former strength that had always captivated him was evident even in her dismissal. From down the hallway came the sound of Lillian humming to herself, a child innocently unaware that her world was about to change irrevocably. Joe felt a surge of emotions he had no name for, rage, wonder, grief, and something terrifyingly like love. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly, the same tone that had closed billion-dollar deals and crushed competitors. Not this time. Devon met his gaze, her amber eyes filled with 7 years of solitary struggle. There's nothing for you. Here, Joe. He glanced past her to where a child's drawings decorated the refrigerator, where a small purple backpack leaned against a worn but clean sofa, where photographs, professionally composed despite their modest frames, captured a little girl growing up without him. You're wrong, he said simply. Everything is here. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Past. Devon Elizabeth closed the door and leaned against it, heart racing as though she'd run for miles. 7 years of carefully constructed defenses had crumbled in an instant at the sight of Joe Rankin's face. She pressed trembling fingers to her temples, fighting the wave of dizziness that had become all too familiar these past months. Mom? Lillian's voice called from her bedroom. Is Mr. Rankin still here? Devon took a steadying breath. No, sweetheart, but we need to talk about what you did today. She made her way to her daughter's room, where Lillian sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by math worksheets. The sight momentarily stole Devon's breath. How many times had she searched that little face for traces of Joe? Now, seeing them together, the resemblance was undeniable. Am I in trouble? Lillian asked, her eyes, Joe's eyes, wide with apprehension. Devon sat beside her daughter, tucking an errant curl behind her ear. What you did was dangerous, baby. Going downtown alone, talking to strangers. Mr. Rankin isn't a stranger, Lillian protested. His picture is in your box. Devon froze. What box? The special one under your bed. I was looking for your birthday present and I found it. Lillian's voice dropped to a whisper. There was a picture of you and him. You looked happy, and there was a ticket from the Rainbow Gardens and a note that said, for the photographer who sees what others miss. That's enough, Devon interrupted gently, heart pounding. Those things are private, Lillian. Is he my daddy? The question hung in the air between them, innocent yet devastating in its simplicity. Devon closed her eyes briefly, unprepared for this moment she'd always known would come. Yes, she finally whispered. But it's complicated, Lily. Is that why he came here? To be my daddy now? No, baby. He came because you went to his office. He didn't know about you before today. Lillian's brow furrowed as she processed this. But why didn't he know? Didn't you tell him? The question pierced Devon like a physical pain. How to explain to a 7-year-old the complexities of adult relationships, of pride and hurt and circumstances? Sometimes, she began carefully, grown-ups make choices they think are right at the time. I thought it was better if it was just you and me. Because he wouldn't want us, Lillian asked, her perception startling in its accuracy. No, Devon answered honestly, because I was afraid. Before Lillian could ask the natural follow-up question, Devon's phone buzzed with a text. The home health nurse was running late. Devon suppressed a sigh. She'd been counting on having help with her evening medications. Homework first, then dinner, she said, rising with effort. We'll talk more about this later. In the sanctuary of her small bathroom, Devon swallowed 2 pills from the nearly empty prescription bottle, then stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was a shadow of the vibrant photographer who had caught Joe Rankin's eye at a charity gala 7 years ago. 7 years earlier. The Rainbow Gardens charity gala glittered with New York's elite, a forest of designer gowns and tuxedos beneath crystal chandeliers. Devon moved through the crowd, with practiced invisibility, her camera capturing candid moments between posed shots. As a last-minute replacement for her mentor, who'd fallen ill, she was grateful for the work, but acutely aware she didn't belong among the guests. "You're missing the real story," a deep voice said behind her as she photographed a group of socialites. Devon turned to find herself looking up at a tall black man whose custom tuxedo couldn't disguise the athletic build beneath. Handsome was too simple a word for him. He possessed a quiet intensity that made the air between them seem charged. "And what story is that?" she asked, professionally curious despite herself. "The genuine moments." He nodded toward the corner, where an elderly woman was discreetly wiping tears as a young violinist played, the humanity underneath the performance. Devon followed his gaze, immediately seeing the composition, age and youth, emotion and art. "Thank you for the tip, Mr. Rankin." Joe Rankin. He extended his hand, and when she took it, she felt an unexpected spark of connection. "And you are?" "Devon Elizabeth. Just the photographer." His smile transformed his serious face. "There's no just about capturing moments others miss." Throughout the evening, she found him watching her work, not with the entitlement she sometimes encountered from wealthy men, but with genuine interest. Near midnight, as the event wound down, he approached her again. "Would you take one more photograph?" he asked. "Of course. Where's your group?" "No group, just the garden outside. There's a perfect crescent moon rising above the fountain." Intrigued, Devon followed him through French doors, onto a terrace where indeed the scene was breathtaking. As she adjusted her settings to capture the low light, fat raindrops suddenly broke from the clouds that had been threatening all evening. Guests scattered inside, but Devon stayed, transfixed by how the rain caught the garden lights. Joe remained beside her, apparently unconcerned about his expensive suit. "Some things are worth getting wet for," he said, watching her rather than the garden. They ended up talking until 3 in the morning, sheltered in a gazebo as rain drummed. On the roof, he spoke of growing up in South Chicago, of the grandmother who'd raised him after his parents' death in a car accident, of building his company from nothing with just her life savings and his own determination. She told him about her Brooklyn childhood, her dreams of becoming a renowned photographer, her struggles in a competitive industry dominated by men who dismissed her unique perspective. When the rain finally stopped, he offered her his jacket and called his driver to take her home. At her door, what started as a polite thank you became a kiss that changed everything. She invited him in, something she'd never done on a first meeting, and in the soft light of dawn, they discovered each other fully, a connection that felt like recognition rather than introduction. He left with her number programmed into his phone and a promise to call the next day. 3 days later, she saw the newspaper announcement of his engagement to Vanessa Chambers, telecommunications heiress and New York socialite. The accompanying article mentioned it was the culmination of a 2-year courtship. Devon didn't answer when he called. Twice. Then she changed her number. A month later, the pregnancy test showed positive. Now, standing in her bathroom, 7 years later, Devon touched the tiny moon pendant she still wore beneath her clothes, a gift from Joe that arrived at the gallery the week after they met. She'd nearly thrown it away a dozen times, but could never quite bring herself to sever that last, tenuous connection. A crash from the kitchen jolted her back to reality. She found Lillian trying to reach the prescription bottles in the cabinet. A chair tipped over beside her. "Lillian Elizabeth, what are you doing?" "Your pill alarm went off," Lillian explained, pointing to Devon's phone on the counter. "I was trying to help." Devon's heart twisted at the role reversal, her child taking care of her. This was exactly what she'd been trying to prevent by keeping their struggling little family intact, just the two of them. "I've got it, baby. Why don't you set the table instead?" As they ate a simple dinner of pasta and pre-made salad, Devon noticed Lillian pushing food around her plate rather than eating. "What's on your mind, Lily Bean?" "Is Mr. Rankin rich?" The question was casual, but Devon sensed the weight behind it. "Yes, he is." "Rich enough for your special medicine?" Devon set down her fork. "Lillian, listen to me. We don't need anyone's help. My new treatment starts next week, and I've saved enough to cover the first round." The lie tasted bitter, but she'd been telling versions of it for months to protect her daughter from the truth, that she'd been denied the experimental treatment because she couldn't afford the initial costs. But no buts. "We've always been a team, you and me. That's not changing." Later, after tucking Lillian in with their nightly ritual of 3 stories and a special brave girl blessing, a tradition begun when nightmares plagued her daughter's sleep, Devon retrieved the weathered wooden box from beneath her bed. Inside lay the fragments of that singular night, a pressed flower from the garden, the ticket stub from the gala, a handwritten note on Rankin Enterprises stationery for the photographer who sees what others miss, and the photograph, the only one she'd kept. In it, she and Joe sat on the gazebo steps, his jacket around, her shoulders, both laughing at something now forgotten. One of the catering staff had taken it with her camera, a stolen moment of perfect connection. Behind these mementos lay documents she'd prepared years ago but never filed. Paternity acknowledgement, forms, potential custody arrangements, letters to Joe she'd written but never sent. She'd been contemplating contacting him for months as her condition worsened, the fear of leaving Lillian alone eventually outweighing her pride. Now he had found them anyway, through the determined efforts of their precocious daughter. Devon's phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. "I'm not disappearing again. We need to talk, not just about Lillian, but about your treatment. Please." She stared at the words until they blurred, weakness washing over her. The medication wasn't working as well anymore. Her oncologist had been clear. Without the specialized treatment, her prognosis was measured in months, not years. Devon tucked the phone away, without responding, and curled onto her bed, still in her clothes. She'd fought so hard to keep their lives stable, to be everything Lillian needed. The thought of accepting help from Joe felt like surrender, an admission that she couldn't protect their daughter alone. Yet as sleep claimed her, one thought surfaced with crystal clarity. If she continued refusing help, soon Lillian would have no mother at all, and that was a far greater failure than swallowing her pride. Chapter 3. The First Attempt. 3 days had passed since Joe Rankin's world tilted on its axis. 3 days of unanswered texts, calls that went to voicemail, and an ache in his chest that grew with each passing hour. He stood at the window of his penthouse. Manhattan spread before him like a sea of possibilities, yet all he could think about was a small apartment in Brooklyn, where his daughter, slept beneath a ceiling of glow-in-the-dark stars. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. Dr. Forrest confirmed for 2 p.m. Joe checked his watch. He'd pulled strings, called in favors, researched late into the night. If Devon wouldn't respond to him directly, he'd try another approach. By 1:30, he was parked across from Horizon Gallery, watching as Devon greeted customers, her professional smile masking the fatigue evident in the careful way she moved. Even clearly ill, she possessed a grace that caught the eye, the same quality that had drawn him to her 7 years ago. At precisely 2 p.m., Dr. Catherine Forrest, one of the nation's top oncologists and head of Memorial Sloan Kettering's innovative treatment program, entered the gallery. Joe watched through the window as the doctor engaged Devon in conversation, ostensibly interested in a striking black-and-white photograph of the Brooklyn Bridge at dawn. He could pinpoint the exact moment Devon realized what was happening. Her spine straightened, her expression cooled, and she excused herself from a customer to confront the doctor. Even from a distance, Joe could read the tension in her shoulders, the tightly controlled anger. 5 minutes later, Dr. Forrest exited the gallery, crossing the street to where Joe waited. She refused, the doctor said simply. Rather eloquently, I might add. Joe's jaw tightened. Did you explain? I explained everything, the treatment protocol, the success rates, the fact that all expenses would be covered by an anonymous benefactor. The doctor's expression softened with professional compassion. Mr. Rankin, you can't force someone to accept help, no matter how desperately they need it. Thank you for trying, Joe said, his gaze still fixed on the gallery where Devon had disappeared into a back room. Dr. Forrest placed a hand on his arm. If you'll take some advice, medical help isn't the only kind she needs right now. From what little she said, there's a history between you that needs healing before she'll accept anything else. After the doctor left, Joe remained in his car, a luxury vehicle conspicuously out of place in this neighborhood. He'd built an empire by strategizing, by anticipating obstacles and overcoming them through careful planning. But this required something beyond business acumen. His phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, Lillian, school pickup, 3:15. He'd programmed it the night after meeting her, a small gesture toward the years of fatherhood he'd missed. Matthias, Westbrook Elementary. Children streamed from the doors in a riot of colorful backpacks and excited chatter. Joe spotted Lillian immediately, her purple backpack bouncing slightly as she walked beside a teacher. He stepped from the car, and her face lit with recognition. Mr. Rankin. She broke from the teacher's side, running toward him with none of the reserve she'd shown in his office. Your mom asked me to pick you up today, he lied smoothly, offering a reassuring smile to the approaching teacher. I'm Lillian's father. The words felt strange on his tongue, yet undeniably right. The teacher hesitated. You're not on our approved pickup list, sir. Call her mother, Joe suggested. I'm sure it's just an oversight. While the teacher stepped away to make the call, Lillian looked up at him with Joe's own eyes. Are you really going to be picking me up now? Would you like that? Joe asked, suddenly uncertain. Lillian nodded solemnly. Mum gets tired after work. Sometimes we have to sit at the bus stop for a long time before she feels strong enough to walk home. The simple statement hit Joe like a physical blow. While he'd been accumulating wealth and power, this child, his child, had been quietly shouldering adult worries. The teacher returned, her expression apologetic. I couldn't reach Miss Elizabeth, but the school director recognizes you, Mr. Rankin, from your educational foundation work. Given the circumstances, she's approved the pickup this one time, provided we update our records tomorrow. Joe offered his most charming smile. I appreciate your thoroughness in keeping Lillian safe. In the car, Lillian seemed fascinated by the leather seats and multiple buttons. Is this really your car? Do you drive it yourself? Sometimes, Joe admitted, but usually I have a driver. Like a princess, Lillian giggled, then grew serious. Are you taking me home? Not just yet. I thought we might stop for ice cream first, if that's okay with you. Her eyes widened. On a school night, at the small ice cream parlor, Joe watched in amusement as Lillian deliberated over flavors with the solemnity of a judge delivering a verdict. She finally settled on strawberry with rainbow sprinkles, while Joe chose classic vanilla. They sat at a corner table, Lillian's feet dangling inches from the floor. For all his negotiation skills, Joe found himself nervous about talking to this small person who shared his DNA. Lillian, he began carefully, how much has your mum told you about me? She licked her spoon thoughtfully. Not much. Just that you didn't know about me, and that's why you weren't around. Her eyes met his, direct and unflinching. She keeps your picture, though, and sometimes I hear her talking to it when she thinks I'm asleep. Joe's heart constricted. What does she say? Mostly sorry things. And once she asked why you didn't call back, Lillian tilted her head. Did you lose her phone number? The innocent question carried the weight of 7 years of misunderstanding. Something like that, Joe replied gently. But I'm here now, and I'd like to help you and your mom. Because of her being sick? That's part of it. But also because... Joe hesitated, searching for words a 7-year-old would understand. Because families should take care of each other. Are we a family? The hope in her voice was palpable. We are, Joe confirmed, surprised by how fiercely he meant it. You, me, and your mom. Lillian beamed, rainbow sprinkles dotting her chin. I knew it. I told Zoe Williams you must be important because you have a tower with your name on it, and important people can fix things. What things do you want fixed, Lillian? Her smile faded. Mom's light. It's getting dimmer, I can tell, because her laugh doesn't reach her eyes anymore, and sometimes she holds onto the wall when she walks. Lillian leaned forward, lowering her voice. I heard the doctor say she needs special medicine that costs more than our apartment for a whole year. Joe made a mental note to be more careful about medical discussions around Lillian, who clearly missed nothing. I want to help with that, but your mum is very independent. You mean stubborn, Lillian corrected, with the frankness of childhood. Grandma used to say Mom was born with her feet planted and her mind made up. Joe couldn't help but smile. That sounds accurate. She's afraid, Lillian added suddenly. Of what, sweetheart? Everything now. Lillian's small face grew solemn. She thinks I don't know, but I do. She's afraid of the medicine not working, and of the money running out, and of me being alone. Her eyes, so like his own, filled with tears. And I'm afraid too. Without hesitation, Joe moved to her side of the booth and wrapped an arm around her thin shoulders. I'm not going to let anything happen to either of you, Lillian. I promise. She leaned against him, a trust so immediate and complete it humbled him. Pinky promise? Joe linked his little finger with hers, a sacred contract. Pinky promise. When he finally drove her home, Joe walked Lillian to the apartment door, a small pharmacy bag in hand. Devon opened the door, her face pale with worry. "The school called," she said, relief and anger warring in her voice. "Where have you been?" "Ice cream," Lillian announced, slipping past her mother into the apartment. "Dad and I had ice cream." A word "dad" hung in the air between the adults, new and raw and undeniable. "We need to talk," Joe said quietly, offering the pharmacy bag. "I had your prescriptions refilled, the good ones, not the generics." Devon's hand trembled slightly as she took the bag, pride and necessity battling visibly across her face. "This doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," Joe countered gently. "And I think you know that." Before she could respond, Lillian called from inside, "Mom, come see, Dad's going to fix your light." Devon's eyes closed briefly, a mixture of emotions too complex to name passing across her features. "You can't just walk back into our lives." "And I'm not walking anywhere, Devon," Joe interrupted, his voice low and intent. "Not this time, not ever again." From his car he watched the apartment windows until the lights went out, thinking of the little girl who now called him Dad, and the woman whose fierce independence both frustrated and moved him. As he was about to drive away, his phone lit with a text message, the first response from Devon. "The medicine wasn't necessary, but thank you." 6 words. A small crack in the wall between them, but enough for now. Joe started the engine, determination settling in his chest like a physical weight. This was only the first attempt. He would not fail his daughter, or her mother, again. Chapter 4. Hospital Truths. The autumn rain beat against the classroom windows as Lillian's teacher, Ms. Winters, explained long division to the second-grade class. At the back of the room, Lillian's desk sat conspicuously empty. For the 3rd time that week, she had missed school. Across town, Devon Elizabeth stood on the auditorium stage of Williamson Elementary, her camera poised to capture the perfect shot of 3rd graders in colonial costumes. As a freelance photographer, she couldn't afford to turn down even small jobs like this one, especially now, with medical bills mounting and her strength increasingly unreliable. "That's wonderful, children. Just one more." Devon's vision suddenly tunneled, darkness creeping at the edges. She gripped her camera tighter, willing the spell to pass. "Not here, not now." "Miss Elizabeth?" The teacher's concerned voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right?" Devon forced a smile, professional mask firmly in place. "Just lost my balance for a moment. Let's finish up." She managed 3 more shots before her knees buckled. 10 minutes later, Joe's phone rang as he concluded a meeting with Japanese investors. Seeing Lillian's school on the caller ID, he immediately excused himself. "Mr. Rankin, this is Principal Matthews from Westbrook Elementary. I'm calling about Lillian Elizabeth." Joe's heart stuttered. "Is she all right?" "Lillian is fine, but we haven't been able to reach her mother. Apparently, Ms. Elizabeth collapsed at a job this morning and has been taken to Brooklyn Memorial Hospital. Since you're listed as Lillian's father on her emergency contact form, a recent addition, I understand, we need you to pick her up." Joe was already heading for the elevator. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When he arrived at the school, he found Lillian sitting quietly in the administration office, her purple backpack clutched to her chest like armor. The moment she saw him, she flew into his arms with a trust that still astonished him. "They said Mom fell down," she whispered, against his shirt, like before. Joe pulled back to look into her face, a smaller, feminine version of his own. "Your mom is getting help at the hospital. We're going to go see her right now." In the car, Lillian grew uncharacteristically quiet, staring out at the rain-slicked streets. "Has this happened before?" Joe asked gently. "Your mom falling down?" Lillian nodded, still looking out the window. "3 times, once at home, once at the grocery store, and once at the park. She said it was because she was tired, but I heard her tell Aunt Tasha it was because of the thing growing inside her." Joe's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Cancer. Devon had cancer, and he'd spent a week dancing around her pride instead of taking decisive action. At Brooklyn Memorial, Joe flashed his most authoritative smile at the information desk. "I'm looking for Devon Elizabeth. She was brought in earlier today." The receptionist tapped at her computer. "Are you family?" "I'm her." Joe hesitated only a fraction of a second. "I'm her husband, and this is our daughter." The small deception worked. They were directed to the 5th floor, where they found Devon in a curtained alcove rather than a proper room, arguing with a harried-looking doctor. Absolutely unnecessary. "I just need some fluids, and I'll be fine. Miss Elizabeth, your tests indicate severe anemia and concerning liver function. We need to admit you for at least—" The doctor broke off as he noticed Joe and Lillian. "Ah, your family is here." Devon's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in understanding as she took in Joe's determined expression. "What are you doing here?" "Mommy," Lillian broke from Joe's side, rushing to the bed. "You fell down again." Devon smoothed her daughter's hair, avoiding Joe's gaze. "I'm fine, baby, just a little tired. I'm coming home soon." The doctor cleared his throat. "Actually, Miss Elizabeth, as I was explaining, we need to keep you for observation and additional tests." Joe stepped forward. "What sort of tests?" "And you are?" the doctor asked. Before Joe could answer, Devon sighed. "He's Lillian's father." The doctor nodded. "I'd be happy to discuss Ms. Elizabeth's condition with both of you, but perhaps not in front of—" He glanced meaningfully at Lillian. "Lillian," Joe said, "would you mind waiting just outside the curtain for a minute? There's a vending machine down the hall. Here's $5. Why don't you get us all some snacks?" Once Lillian was out of earshot, the doctor's expression grew serious. "Ms. Elizabeth has stage 3 inflammatory breast cancer. It's an aggressive form that requires immediate treatment. She's been prescribed a regimen that should have started weeks ago, but our records show she's missed several appointments." Joe turned to Devon, whose face had gone carefully blank. "Weeks ago?" "I've been getting treatment," she insisted, though the lie was evident in her eyes. The doctor consulted his tablet. "Not the recommended protocol. According to our records, you've only been taking pain management medication and basic steroids, essentially palliative care rather than curative treatment, because that's what my insurance covers," Devon snapped, color rising in her pale cheeks. "And it's insufficient," the doctor replied bluntly. "Without the full treatment protocol—" "How long?" Joe interrupted, his voice low and steady. The doctor hesitated. "Without proper treatment, given the rate of progression we're seeing, months, not years." The words fell like stones in the sterile hospital air. Joe felt as though the floor had vanished beneath him, yet he remained standing through sheer force of will. "That won't be happening," he said with quiet authority. "Devon will be receiving the full treatment protocol, starting immediately. I'll handle the financial arrangements." "Joe," Devon began. "No." For the first time since their reunion, he cut her off completely. "Not this time, Devon. This isn't about you and me or pride or independence. This is about Lillian, our daughter." The doctor, sensing the tension, excused himself with a promise to return with admission paperwork. Alone with Devon, Jo pulled a chair to her bedside. She looked smaller somehow against the white hospital sheets, her elegant neck too thin, her cheekbones too pronounced. The hospital gown couldn't disguise how much weight she'd lost, something she'd managed to hide with carefully chosen clothing during their limited interactions. "You lied to Lillian," he said quietly. "You told her you were getting treatment." Devon looked away. "I'm doing what I can afford, which is allowing yourself to die slowly instead of fighting. You have no right." "I have every right," Jo countered, leaning forward. "You kept my daughter from me for 7 years, Devon. I lost 7 birthdays, 7 Christmases, 7 years of tucking her in at night, and now you're willing to take away all her future years with her mother because you're too stubborn to accept. Help!" Tears filled Devon's eyes, but her voice remained steady. "You don't understand. I've always taken care of myself, of Lillian. When I found out I was pregnant, I made a choice to do it alone. I can't just change who I am because circumstances got difficult." "You made that choice based on incomplete information," Jo said. "Did you know I broke off my engagement the week after we met, that I tried to find you when you disappeared?" Devon's eyes widened. "What?" "I called twice. When you didn't answer, I sent my assistant to the gallery. They said you'd quit without notice. I had flowers delivered to your apartment. They were returned. I assumed you weren't interested." Jo's voice roughened with old hurt. "By the time I realized you might have seen the engagement announcement in the papers and misunderstood, you'd vanished completely." Devon's hand moved unconsciously to the moon pendant hidden beneath her hospital gown. "Your assistant came to the gallery, but I was out sick with morning sickness. My co-worker said someone from Rankin Enterprises had been asking for me, but I thought—" She trailed off, the assumptions of 7 years ago suddenly gossamer thin in retrospect. "You thought I was trying to buy your silence?" "Pay you off," Jo supplied, seeing the realization dawn in her eyes. "Devon, I sent that moon necklace because that night in the rain was the first time in years I'd felt real. I wanted—" "Mom! Dad! Look what I got!" Lillian's excited voice broke the moment as she returned, arms laden with snacks. "They had those chocolate bars you like, Mom. The ones you said are too expensive, but Dad gave me $5 whole. Jo and Devon exchanged a glance, mutual understanding passing between them. This conversation would have to continue later. While Lillian arranged the snacks on Devon's tray table, a nurse arrived with admission forms. Jo took them, scanning the pages of financial disclaimers and insurance requirements. "I'll handle these," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. To his surprise, Devon merely nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Lillian needs to eat a proper dinner, not just chocolate, and she has homework." "I can stay with Dad," Lillian suggested, looking between her parents hopefully, "while you get better." The casualness with which she'd adopted Dad still caught Jo off guard. Children, he was learning, possessed a remarkable ability to accept new truths. Devon's eyes met Jo's over their daughter's head, uncertainty warring with necessity. "I don't know if—" "I wasn't aware of it," Jo said softly, repeating words he'd said days earlier at her door, but with new meaning now. "You have a daughter means I have a daughter. Let me be her father, Devon. Let me take care of both of you." Something shifted in Devon's expression, not surrender, but perhaps the first tentative step toward trust. "Just until I'm discharged," she conceded. "And you'll need her school things, her favorite stuffed rabbit?" "We'll bring them tomorrow," Jo promised. "Right now you need to rest and let the doctors do their job." As Lillian hugged her mother goodbye, Jo stepped into the hallway to make calls, to his assistant about rescheduling meetings indefinitely, to his housekeeper about preparing a room for Lillian, and finally to Dr. Forrest, the specialist Devon had rebuffed days earlier. I need you to take over a case at Brooklyn Memorial, he explained without preamble. And I need the best treatment plan available, regardless of cost. When he returned to Devon's alcove, he found a nurse helping her into a proper room. Lillian clutched her mother's hand, anxiety written clearly across her young face. Everything's going to be okay now, Lilybean, Devon assured her daughter. The doctors are going to help me. Promise? Lillian asked in a small voice. Devon's eyes met Joe's over their daughter's head. I promise. As they left the hospital, Lillian's small hand in his, Joe felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. There were no guarantees in medicine, no matter how much money one possessed. But for the first time in a week, he sensed Devon might actually be willing to fight, not just for herself, but for the family they might yet become. Dad? Lillian's voice broke into his thoughts as they reached the car. Is Mom really going to be okay? Joe knelt to meet her eyes, his eyes, in the rain-dappled parking lot. I can't promise it will be easy or quick, but I promise you this. We're going to do everything possible to help her get better, you and me together, okay? Lillian studied his face with the solemn scrutiny only children possess, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw. Okay. That night, as he tucked Lillian into the guest room of his penthouse, Joe felt the weight of her absolute trust. She fell asleep, clutching his hand, her breathing deep and even despite the strange surroundings. His phone vibrated with a text message from Devon. The nurse says Lillian's stuffed rabbit is named Mr. Carrots, not Bunny. Second drawer of her. Dresser. She won't sleep without it. Joe smiled at the screen, typing back, already found him. She's asleep. How are you feeling? The response came quickly. Scared, but trying to believe, for her sake. For all of us. Joe stared at those last 3 words long after the screen dimmed. For all of us. Perhaps not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. Chapter 5. The Second Chance. This is absurd, Devon said, staring at the glossy photographs. Joe had spread across her hospital bed. I'm not moving into your penthouse. 3 days had passed since her collapse, days filled with tests, consultations, and the growing realization that her illness was more advanced than she'd allowed herself to believe. The doctors now spoke of aggressive treatment protocols with names that twisted her tongue and side effects that made her stomach clench with dread. Joe gathered the photos, images of his penthouse's newly renovated East Wing. It's practical. 24-hour nursing care, proximity to Memorial Sloan Kettering, where Dr. Forrest practices, and most importantly, stability for Lillian. Lillian has stability, Devon countered, though the argument sounded hollow even to her own ears. How stable was a child whose mother kept collapsing, whose school attendance had become sporadic, who worried about adult concerns no 7-year-old should carry? She misses you, Joe said quietly. Last night she asked if you were going to disappear like a goldfish did. Devon closed her eyes, pain that had nothing to do with cancer, lancing through her chest. Mr. Bubbles jumped out of his bowl. We had a funeral in the park. She thinks everything she loves goes away, Joe continued, his voice gentle but relentless. I had to convince her that you're coming back, that you're not choosing to leave her. That's manipulative, Devon whispered, but without heat. It's the truth, Joe countered. She needs both of us right now, Devon, and you need proper care. Devon turned toward the window, where autumn rain traced patterns on the glass. In the 3 days since her admission, Joe had been a constant presence, arranging for specialists, managing her treatment plan, liaising with insurance companies. Each night, he brought Lillian for visits, their daughter's face brightening the sterile hospital room like sunlight breaking through clouds. And each night, Lillian left with Joe, their heads bent together in quiet conversation, sharing a connection that sent equal parts gratitude and jealousy coursing through Devon. "What's your plan?" Joe asked, interrupting her thoughts. "When they discharge you, where will you go? Your apartment has no elevator. You'll be weak from treatment, and Lillian is too small to help if you fall again." "I have options," Devon insisted, though in truth, her planning had extended only as far as getting through each day's treatment. A gentle knock at the door saved her from elaborating on these non-existent options. A woman in a tailored suit entered, her warm smile contrasting with her professional demeanor. "Ms. Elizabeth, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, child psychologist at Westbrook Elementary." Devon straightened, alarm cutting through her fatigue. "Is something wrong with Lillian?" "Nothing acute," Dr. Chen assured her, taking the seat Joe offered, but her teacher noticed concerning changes in her behavior and academic performance over the past few months. "Given your current situation, the school thought it might be helpful for me to assess how Lillian is coping." "And," Devon prompted, her throat tight. Dr. Chen opened a leather portfolio. "Lillian is experiencing significant anxiety, which is manifesting in several ways. Her recent artwork shows themes of loss and abandonment. She's having trouble concentrating in class, and she's begun hoarding food in her desk, a common response to perceived instability at home." Devon's hands twisted in the thin hospital blanket. She'd tried so hard to shield Lillian from the worst of her illness, to maintain normalcy despite the increasing difficulty of doing so. Hearing her failures laid out so clinically pierced through her carefully maintained composure. "She's also showing remarkable resilience," Dr. Chen continued, her tone softening. "She speaks very lovingly of both her parents and seems to be adapting well to her father's presence in her life. But she needs consistency right now, a stable environment where she doesn't need to worry about adult concerns." "Like whether her mother will collapse again," Devon whispered. "Precisely." Dr. Chen closed her portfolio. "I understand Mr. Rankin has offered his home as a temporary solution during your recovery." Devon shot Joe a look. "You arranged this." "I spoke with the school," he admitted. "They suggested Dr. Chen might help us find the best solution for Lillian." "And what would you recommend, Doctor?" Devon asked, unable to keep a hint of challenge from her voice. Dr. Chen met her gaze directly. "I would recommend whatever arrangement provides Lillian with the most stability and the least disruption during this difficult time. If that means temporarily living in Mr. Rankin's home where nursing care is available and both parents are accessible, I believe that would be in Lillian's best interest." The words hung in the air between them, professional and dispassionate, yet loaded with implication. Devon looked from Dr. Chen to Joe, seeing not triumph in his expression, but genuine concern for Lillian, and perhaps for her as well. "I'd need my own space," she said finally. "Not just a guest room." Relief washed over Joe's face. "There's a garden house on the property. It's fully furnished, private with its own entrance. You'd have independence, but help nearby when needed." Devon raised an eyebrow. "A garden house in Manhattan?" A ghost of a smile touched Joe's lips. "The penthouse has a private roof garden. The previous owner built a glass pavilion that I've rarely used. It's small but comfortable." "And the nursing care," Devon pressed, still searching for reasons to refuse. "Private duty nurses during your treatment phases, on call when you're feeling stronger. And I've arranged for a leave of absence from work to be primary caregiver for Lillian." Joe held up a hand as Devon began to protest. "This isn't negotiable, Devon. Our daughter needs stability, and you need to focus on getting well." Our daughter. The word still sounded strange, a reality she'd never allowed herself to imagine during 7 years of single motherhood. Yet here it was. Joe fully embracing fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else in his life. Dr. Chen stood, sensing a decision had been reached. I'll check in with Lillian next week to see how she's adjusting. And Ms. Elizabeth, her professional demeanor softened slightly. Children are remarkably adaptable. What damages them most isn't change, but the fear that comes from sensing their parents' distress and feeling powerless to help. After the psychologist left, silence stretched between Devon and Joe. Outside, the autumn rain turned to early sleet, a reminder that winter approached, a winter Devon had privately feared she might not see. "This is temporary," she said finally. "Until I'm stronger," Joe nodded, accepting this condition without argument. "The garden house will be ready when you're discharged. Lillian and I will bring whatever personal items you need from your apartment." "Lillian seems comfortable with you," Devon observed, trying to keep the complex tangle of emotions from her voice. "She's extraordinary," Joe said simply. "You've done an amazing job raising her, Devon. I hope you know that." The sincere praise caught her off guard, warming places long gone cold. "She calls you Dad now. Is that okay?" For the first time since his return to their lives, Joe sounded uncertain. Devon considered the question honestly. "Yes," she decided. "It's who you are to her. It's who you should have been all along." "I would have been," Joe said quietly, "if I'd known." The old hurt flickered between them. 7 years of misunderstanding, built on assumptions neither had verified. But now wasn't the time to excavate those wounds, not with treatment beginning tomorrow, and a little girl waiting for both her parents to come home. "There's something I need you to understand," Devon said, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not agreeing to this arrangement because I want your help. I'm doing it for Lillian." Joe nodded, accepting her terms without argument. "I understand." But as he gathered his coat to leave, he paused at the door. "Devon, for what it's worth, I'm glad it was my office she walked into that day. I'm glad to have found you both, even under these circumstances." After he left, Devon turned again to the window, watching sleet turn back to rain. The truth, which she wasn't ready to admit aloud, was that some small hidden part of her was glad too, not about the illness that had forced her hand, but about the chance to see Joe with Lillian, to witness the bond already forming between father and daughter. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of something else. A second chance none of them had expected, arriving in the most unlikely package. Her phone buzzed with a text from Joe. "Lillian wants to know if you need Mr. Carrots tonight, or if she can keep him to tell him about the garden house." "Your call." Devon smiled despite herself, typing back, "Tell her Mr. Carrots should stay with her, but let him know I'll see him tomorrow." The reply came quickly. "Mr. Carrots says he can't wait. Neither can we." Devon set down the phone, allowing herself, just for a moment, to imagine a future where we included all three of them. It was a dangerous thought, laden with hopes she'd long ago packed away. But as rain turned once more to sleet against the window, she found herself unable to banish it completely. Chapter 6. Small Bridges. The glass walls of the garden house caught the late afternoon sunlight, casting prism patterns across the floor where Devon sat wrapped in a cashmere blanket. 1 week had passed since her discharge from the hospital, a week of careful adjustments to this new reality where luxury cushioned her illness, and Joe Rankin was a daily presence in their lives. She watched through the window as Lillian and Joe knelt by the koi pond, heads bent together in serious conversation. Though she couldn't hear them, Devon recognized her daughter's animated gestures, the same ones she used when explaining something she considered vitally important. The identical tilt of their heads as they studied something in the water struck Devon with a physical pang. Genetic connections impossible to deny, nature asserting itself despite 7 years of separation. Fish have different personalities, Lillian had informed Devon that morning. Dad says the orange one with black spots is grumpy, like his finance guy, Mr. Porter. Dad. The word no longer jarred Devon when Lillian used it. Somehow, in the space of mere weeks, Joe had slipped into fatherhood as though born to the role, helping, with homework, enforcing bedtime, even mastering the intricate process of styling Lillian's natural hair. That last achievement had nearly undone Devon when she'd first witnessed it. Joe, sitting on the bathroom floor, laptop open to a tutorial video, patiently creating neat cornrows while Lillian chatted about her day. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Naomi, the day nurse, entered with a tray of medications and a knowing smile. "They've been at that pond for almost an hour," she remarked, arranging pills into neat groupings. "Your daughter is quite the little scientist." "She gets that from her father," Devon replied without thinking, then faltered at the realization. There had been so many moments over the years when Lillian's analytical mind had puzzled her. The methodical way she organized her toys, her fascination with how things worked. Devon had attributed these traits to her own father, but now she recognized them in Joe. 7 years of assigning characteristics, of filling in blanks, suddenly rewritten by the living presence of the man himself. "Time for the afternoon round," Naomi announced, handing Devon the first set of pills. "Dr. Forrest called. Your blood work is showing improvement, but she wants to adjust the dosage on the—" "Mom!" Lillian burst through the door, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Dad says I can name the new fish. We're getting baby ones that will grow up with the big uns." Joe followed at a more measured pace, stopping at the threshold as though awaiting permission to enter what had become Devon's sanctuary. Despite his ownership of the entire property, he had respected her space completely, never entering. Without invitation, Devon nodded slightly, granting the unspoken request. "Baby fish sound like a lot of responsibility." "Dad says I'm very responsible," Lillian announced, climbing onto the window seat beside Devon. "He says, I get that from you." Devon's eyes met Joe's over their daughter's head, something unspoken, passing between them. Gratitude, perhaps, or acknowledgement of the careful way he honored her role in Lillian's life, even while establishing his own. Naomi tactfully gathered the medication tray. "I'll be back for the evening dose at 7, Miss Elizabeth." After the nurse departed, Lillian snuggled closer to Devon, her small body fitting perfectly into the curve of her mother's side. "You look prettier today. Your eyes aren't so tired." "I feel better," Devon admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. The aggressive treatment protocol was brutal, but the consistent care and relief from financial worry had allowed her body to direct all its resources toward healing. "Good enough for a movie night?" Lillian asked hopefully. "Dad's never seen The Princess and the Frog, and I told him it's your favorite because the princess is an artist like you." Devon hesitated, the familiar instinct to maintain boundaries warring with Lillian's evident desire to include both parents in her evening ritual. Joe sensed her reluctance. "Another time, perhaps. I have some work calls to make tonight." "No, you don't," Lillian objected with the directness of childhood. "You told Mr. Porter no calls until tomorrow because tonight was family time." Family time, such a simple phrase, yet so loaded with implication. Devon saw Joe preparing to backtrack, to respect her unspoken wishes for distance. "Movie night? Sounds nice," she heard herself say. "But here in the garden house, not the main living room." It was a small concession, but from Joe's expression, she knew he understood its significance. Later, as Lillian arranged pillows on the floor with scientific precision, Joe helped Devon from the window seat to a more comfortable position on the sofa. His hand beneath her elbow was steady and warm, offering support without implying weakness, a delicate balance he'd somehow mastered during their week of cohabitation. "Thank you," she murmured, meaning more than just the physical assistance. "How's the pain today?" he asked quietly, genuine concern in his eyes. "Manageable." Devon adjusted the blanket around her legs. "Dr. Forrest says that's a good sign." Joe nodded, relief evident in the slight easing of his shoulders. In these moments, when his carefully maintained composure slipped just enough to reveal the worry beneath, Devon glimpsed what these weeks had cost him as well. The weight of sudden fatherhood, of assuming responsibility for her care, of rearranging his life to accommodate them both. "Perfect," Lillian announced, surveying her pillow arrangement. "Dad, you sit by Mom, and I'll sit on the pillows." As the movie began, Devon was acutely aware of Joe beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could sense his warmth, smell the subtle cedar notes of his cologne. Lillian had positioned herself on her pillow nest, head tipped back against the sofa between them, effectively joining all three into a unit. Halfway through the film, Lillian's breathing deepened into sleep, her small face relaxed in complete security. Devon watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, overwhelmed by a wave of love so intense it physically ached. "She prays for you every night," Joe said softly, following her gaze to their sleeping child. "Always the same words. Please help Mommy's light get bright again." Devon's throat tightened. "She told you about the light?" Joe nodded. "It's how she understands what's happening to you, not cancer. That's too clinical, too adult. But light that's dimming, that she understands. It's how my grandmother used to talk about people," Devon explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "She'd say everyone has a light inside, and you can see it in their eyes when they're truly happy. I didn't realize Lillian had internalized it so completely." On screen, the princess and her prince dance beneath glowing fireflies, but neither adult was watching anymore. "She has your creativity," Joe observed. "The way she sees the world in metaphors and stories. And your analytical mind," Devon countered, "the way she has to understand how everything works." A small smile touched Joe's lips. Nature and nurture, perfectly balanced. The simple observation opened something in Devon's chest, acknowledgement that Lillian was not just hers, not just his, but truly theirs. A bridge between them that would exist regardless of what happened next. "I found her photo," Joe said after a moment, his voice carefully neutral. "The one from the charity gala. It was with my grandmother's things in storage. I'd given it to her because she'd been asking when I was going to settle down and give her great-grandchildren." Devon stilled, caught off guard by this glimpse into a past she'd reimagined countless times. "You showed your grandmother our picture?" Joe nodded, his eyes on Lillian rather than her. "She said you had kind eyes, that you looked at me like I was more than my bank account." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She died 3 months after we met. I wish she could have known Lillian." Devon tried to imagine an alternate history where she'd called Joe back, where she'd given him the chance to explain about the engagement, where Lillian had grown up knowing her father's family as well as her mother's. The possibilities unfolded, like roads not taken, bittersweet with what might have been. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly, "and I'm sorry Lillian missed knowing her." "She would have adored Lillian," Joe confirmed, "and respected you immensely for raising such an extraordinary child on your own." The simple acknowledgement, free from judgment or resentment over the years he'd missed, loosened something tight in Devon's chest. For the first time since Joe had reappeared in their lives, she allowed herself to consider that perhaps, in his position, she might have made the same assumptions he had about her. Silence. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly, watching Lillian's peaceful face. If... She swallowed hard. If the treatment doesn't work... It will, Joe interrupted, an edge of steel beneath the quiet words. But if it doesn't, Devon persisted, needing to voice the fear that had haunted her since the diagnosis. Would you raise her? Not just financially, but really raise her. Know her favorite foods and how she needs the nightlight on, but the closet door closed. Remember that she's allergic to strawberries, but not raspberries. Understand that when she says she's fine, she usually isn't. Joe turned to face her fully, his expression stripped of the polished corporate veneer she'd grown accustomed to seeing. I would give my life for her, Devon, and I swear to you, if it comes to that, which it won't, I will make sure she knows every day how extraordinary her mother was. How brave, how talented, how fiercely she loved her daughter. In the blue glow of the television screen, with their sleeping child between them, Devon believed him. Not just the promise to care for Lillian, but the conviction that she would survive to do it herself. Okay, she whispered, too exhausted suddenly to maintain the barriers she'd so carefully constructed. As the movie played on, unwatched, Lillian shifted in her sleep, one small hand reaching out to touch her mother's leg, the other unconsciously seeking her father's. Connected by this bridge of childhood trust, Devon and Joe sat in a silence that felt, for the first time, like peace. Later, after Joe had carried Lillian to bed, Devon stood at the window of the garden house, watching the city lights shimmer through the autumn mist. Her fingers found the moon pendant she still wore, the only piece of Joe she'd allowed herself to keep from that night, 7 years ago. Her phone lit with a text message. Thank you for tonight. It meant the world to her. And to me. Devon looked toward the main penthouse, where a single light still burned in what she now knew was Joe's study. Words had never been her strongest form of expression. She communicated through images, through the careful framing of moments caught in time, but tonight she found herself typing a response. Thank you for being the father she deserves. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but standing in the glass house that had become her refuge, Devon Elizabeth realized it might be the first step towards something equally important, acceptance of the present and permission to imagine a future where the three of them might find their way forward together. Chapter 7. The Breaking Point. The winter wind howled outside the penthouse windows, driving sleet against glass in angry bursts. Inside, the atmosphere was equally turbulent as Joe paced the living room, phone pressed to his ear, while Naomi, the day nurse, spoke in urgent, hushed tones. 142, she reported, and rising. We need to get her to the hospital immediately. Joe's grip tightened on the phone. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Call Dr. Forrest and tell her we're coming in. It had been 6 weeks since Devon moved into the garden house. 6 weeks of cautious optimism as the aggressive treatment protocol seemed to be working. Her energy had improved. Her appetite had returned. And yesterday, they'd celebrated when Dr. Forrest reported her tumor markers were dropping significantly and blood counts were moving in the right direction. But cancer was unpredictable, and the newest medication had left Devon's immune system dangerously compromised. What had begun as a mild cough that morning had escalated with frightening speed. Joe took the stairs to the roof garden 2 at a time, the December air biting through his shirt sleeves. He hadn't bothered with a coat. Through the glass walls of the garden house, he could see Naomi bent over Devon's bed, administering oxygen through a portable tank. How is she? Joe demanded, pushing through the door. Devon lay still, her skin ashen except for 2 bright spots of color high on her cheekbones. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, each one visibly painful. Joe, she whispered, reaching for his hand. Lillian. At school, he assured her, squeezing her fingers. They felt like fire against his palm. Don't worry about her right now. But worry filled Devon's fevered eyes. Promise me, she insisted, each word a struggle. Promise you'll take care of her. You're going to be fine, Joe said firmly. But Devon's grip tightened with surprising strength. Promise me. I promise, Joe replied, his throat tight. But I won't need to because you're going to beat this. You hear me, Devon? This is not how our story ends. A ghost of a smile touched her cracked lips. So stubborn, she murmured before her eyes, fluttered closed. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency rooms, doctors' consultations, and the sterile efficiency of Memorial Sloan Kettering's intensive care unit. Pneumonia, the doctors explained, a common but dangerous complication for patients with compromised immune systems. Devon was placed on powerful antibiotics and sedated to help her body fight the infection. How bad is it? Joe asked Dr. Forrest, directly standing outside Devon's ICU room while nurses adjusted IVs and monitors. The oncologist's experienced eyes held no false comfort. The next 24 hours are critical, Mr. Rankin. The infection has taken a significant toll on systems, already weakened by both the cancer and its treatment. Joe absorbed this, his expression revealing nothing of the fear clawing at his chest. What do we need? Specialists, equipment, different antibiotics. We're doing everything medically possible, Dr. Forrest assured him. Now it's up to Devon's will to fight. Will to fight. Joe stared through the glass at Devon's still form, remembering her determination to raise Lillian alone, her refusal to accept help until absolutely necessary, her fierce protection of her independence even when her body was failing. If anyone had the will to survive, it was Devon Elizabeth. And yet, watching the mechanical rise and fall of her chest, doubt crept in for the first time since he'd re-entered their lives. What if her body simply couldn't match her spirit's determination? The thought sent ice through his veins. The prospect of telling Lillian her mother was gone, of raising their daughter alone, haunted by the knowledge that he'd had mere months with the woman he was increasingly certain he still loved. Mr. Rankin, a hospital administrator, approached, clipboard in hand. There are some consent forms that need your signature. As you're not legally Ms. Elizabeth's next of kin. Her daughter is 7 years old, Joe interrupted, and I'm her father. Yes, but without documentation of your relationship to Ms. Elizabeth herself, we need to discuss who has decision-making. Authority should her condition worsen. The implications hit Joe like a physical blow. If Devon's condition deteriorated further, he had no legal right to make medical decisions on her behalf. He wasn't her husband. He wasn't even officially documented as Lillian's father, despite the DNA test he'd privately commissioned weeks ago. I understand, he said, his mind racing. What do you need from me? What followed was a flurry of legal consultations conducted via phone from the hospital waiting room. Joe's attorney arrived with paperwork establishing emergency guardianship of Lillian, based on the DNA confirmation of paternity and Devon's incapacity. A family court judge was contacted, emergency orders were issued, and by nightfall, Joe Rankin was legally recognized as Lillian's father and temporary guardian. It wasn't enough to give him authority over Devon's medical care. That would require documentation that didn't exist, but it ensured Lillian would remain in his custody no matter what happened. Mrs. Abernathy, Lillian's favorite teacher, had agreed to stay with her at the penthouse until Joe could return home. He called to check in, heart-breaking at the anxiety in his daughter's voice. Is Mommy coming home tonight? Lillian asked, her voice small and frightened. Joe closed his eyes, searching for words that would comfort without false promises. Not tonight, Lilybean. The doctors are helping her fight off an infection. She needs to stay where they can give her special medicine. But she's going to be okay, right? The need for reassurance was palpable, even across the phone line. Your mom is the strongest person I know, Joe said truthfully, and she loves you more than anything in the world. That's powerful medicine all by itself. After promising to call again before Lillian's bedtime, Joe returned to the ICU waiting room, settling in for what promised to be a long night. Around midnight, Dr. Forrest found him there, the lines in her face deepened by fatigue. Her fever's still climbing, she reported. We're trying a different antibiotic combination, but I need to be honest with you, Mr. Rankin. If this doesn't work, it will, Joe interrupted, the same steel in his voice that had built his company from nothing. Dr. Forrest studied him for a moment, then nodded, recognizing the need for hope even in the face of difficult odds. Try to get some rest. We'll contact you immediately if there's any change. But Joe didn't rest. He spent the night moving between the waiting room sofa and the observation window of Devon's ICU room, watching the steady rhythm of machines breathing for the woman who had given him the greatest gift of his life. Near dawn, a nurse emerged from Devon's room, her expression carefully neutral. "She's asking for you, Mr. Rankin. She's conscious but very weak." Joe was on his feet immediately. "Is that a good sign?" The nurse hesitated. "It's common for patients to experience periods of lucidity. The doctor will be in shortly." Periods of lucidity. The clinical phrase couldn't disguise its implication, a temporary window of consciousness before. What? Joe refused to complete the thought. Devon's eyes were open when he entered, though they struggled to focus on his face. The oxygen mask had been temporarily adjusted to allow her to speak. "Lillian," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Safe," Joe assured her, taking her hand. It felt lighter somehow, as though the substance of her was already fading. "She's with Mrs. Abernathy. She sends her love." Devon's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. "You have custody?" Of course she would have thought of that. The practical mother, planning even now. "Yes, everything's legal. DNA confirmed. She'll always be taken care of, Devon. I swear it." A tear slipped down Devon's temple, disappearing into her hair. "I was so wrong," she murmured. "About what?" Joe leaned closer to hear her fading voice. "Not telling you, keeping her from you." Devon's fingers twitched in his, a weak attempt to squeeze his hand. "You're the father she deserves." Joe's throat constricted painfully. "We can talk about this when you're stronger," he began, but Devon shook her head slightly. "No, need to say it now." Her breathing grew more labored, each word a struggle. "Thank you for finding us, for loving her, for not giving up." "I'm not giving up now either," Joe said fiercely. "And neither are you, Devon Elizabeth. You hear me? You don't get to say goodbye yet. Lillian needs you. He stopped, the truth rising unbidden from some deep, unguarded place. "I need you." Devon's eyes widened slightly, as though the admission surprised her as much as it did him. Then the monitors began to wail as her oxygen levels plummeted, and medical staff rushed in, ushering Joe firmly outside. The next hours were the longest of Joe's life. Devon was rushed into emergency surgery to drain fluid from her lungs, while Joe alternated between pacing the waiting room and making brief, reassuring calls to Lillian. By afternoon, exhaustion had driven him to the small, private chapel on the hospital's ground floor, where he found himself doing something he hadn't done since his grandmother's death: praying. Not formal prayers from his childhood church, but raw, unfiltered pleas that came from the deepest part of him. Prayers for Devon's survival, for Lillian not to lose her mother, and more selfishly, for the chance to build something with this unexpected family that had been thrust into his life. It was there that Dr. Forrest found him, her surgical cap still in her hands. Joe stood, bracing himself for the worst. "She's stabilized," the doctor said simply. "We're cautiously optimistic." The relief that washed over Joe was so profound, his knees nearly buckled. "She's going to make it?" "She's not out of danger," Dr. Forrest cautioned, "but the fever is responding to the new antibiotics, and her body is fighting. The next few days will tell us more, but yes, I believe she has a good chance now." When Joe was finally allowed to see Devon again, she was sleeping naturally, the ventilator replaced with a nasal cannula. The harsh lines of pain had eased from her face, giving her the appearance of peaceful slumber rather than unconsciousness. Joe sank into the chair beside her bed, finally allowing himself to acknowledge the truth that had been growing inside him since the moment Lillian walked into his office with her carefully written resume. He loved them, both of them, not out of obligation or responsibility, but with a depth that both terrified and exhilarated him. Devon stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "Joe?" she whispered, her voice hoarse but stronger than before. "I'm here," he assured her, taking her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." A small smile touched her lips as she drifted back to sleep. Her fingers curled trustingly in his. And in that moment, Joe Rankin, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, found himself undone by the simple touch of a hand and the miracle of a second chance. Chapter 8. The Treatment Journey. The Swiss clinic resembled a luxury resort more than a medical facility, nestled among snow-capped alpine peaks, with panoramic views that seemed designed to remind patients of life's grandeur beyond illness. 3 weeks had passed since Devon's near-fatal bout with pneumonia, 3 weeks of careful recovery, renewed treatment protocols, and the quiet recalibration of expectations between her and Joe. Now, as she sat on the private balcony of her suite watching Lillian and Joe build a snowman in the garden below, Devon allowed herself to acknowledge how completely her life had transformed in mere months. From fierce independence to reluctant dependence to this new state that felt remarkably like partnership. "Your numbers continue to improve, Miss Elizabeth," Dr. Muller observed, joining her on the balcony with a tablet displaying Devon's latest test results. The Swiss oncologist had a gentle manner that belied his international reputation as a pioneer in experimental cancer treatments. "The new protocol is working precisely as we'd hoped." Devon smiled, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter. Against the mountain chill, another luxury she was still adjusting to, the casual comfort that Joe's wealth provided, from private medical flights to the finest doctors to soft fabrics against her sensitized skin. "When can we begin reducing the steroids?" she asked, her main concern now that the treatment was showing results. The medications that had saved her life had also changed her appearance, rounding her face and adding weight to her once slender frame. Dr. Muller studied her with compassionate understanding. "You're worried about how you look." Devon glanced down at the garden, where Lillian was directing Joe in the precise placement of pine cones on the snowman's face. "It's vain, I know." "It's human," the doctor corrected kindly, "and yes, we can begin tapering next week if these trends continue. The hair will take longer to return, but—" "I've grown rather fond of this style," Devon interrupted, running a hand over her close-cropped head. The cancer had taken her hair, but she'd reclaimed the loss by embracing it, discovering that the severe style accentuated her eyes and cheekbones in a way that felt surprisingly powerful. Below, Lillian's laughter floated up as Joe lifted her to place a knit cap on the snowman's head. The sound was fuller, more carefree than Devon had heard in months, perhaps longer. The weight of worry that had shadowed her daughter's childhood was visibly lifting, replaced by the simple joy of playing in snow with her father. Her father. The words no longer caught in Devon's mind, Jo had stepped into the role with a natural ease that sometimes left her breathless, as though fatherhood had been waiting dormant within him all along, merely needing Lillian's presence to awaken it. "Your family is beautiful," Dr. Mueller observed, following her gaze to the scene below. "Family, not your daughter and her father, but your family, a collective entity that included all three of them." Devon didn't correct him. After the doctor left, promising to return with updated medication schedules, Devon remained on the balcony, absorbing the crystalline beauty of the Alps while reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Jo had arranged everything, within days of her stabilizing from pneumonia, convincing both her doctors and her reluctant self that the innovative treatment available only in Switzerland represented her best chance for remission. "Just the three of us," he'd promised. "No nurses, no assistants, no business calls, family time while you heal." Family time. The same phrase Lillian had used during movie night in the garden house, now adopted by Jo, as though testing whether Devon would object to its implications. She couldn't really, when faced with how desperately Lillian craved exactly that, a family intact, parents united in purpose, if not in relationship. And after the terrifying days in the ICU, when Devon had confronted her own mortality, with brutal clarity, she found her priorities permanently altered. Pride and independence seemed hollow virtues compared to giving Lillian the security of two present, connected parents. A knock at the suite door interrupted her thoughts. Jo entered, his cheeks flushed from the cold, carrying a tray with steaming mugs. "Hot chocolate delivery," he announced. "Lillian's with the art therapist downstairs. She's determined to paint every mountain visible from the property before we leave." Devon accepted the mug gratefully, noticing that Jo had remembered her preference for dark chocolate with a hint of cinnamon. These small, accumulated observations, the way he'd learned her tastes, routines, and needs without being told, continued to surprise her. "Dr. Mueller seems pleased with my progress," she offered, making room for Jo on the balcony's small love seat, another subtle shift in boundaries. Weeks ago, she would have maintained the separation of a chair between them. "He told me they're considering tapering the steroids next week," Jo confirmed, settling beside her but careful not to crowd her space, "and potentially beginning the transition to maintenance therapy rather than active treatment." Devon raised an eyebrow. "You spoke with my doctor?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Jo's face, rare for a man accustomed to commanding business empires. "I hope that's okay. He sought me out after meeting with you. 4 months ago, this would have sparked immediate indignation, an invasion of privacy, an overstepping of boundaries. Now Devon merely nodded. They had weathered her collapse, her pneumonia, the terrifying days when her survival hung in balance. Medical privacy seemed a trivial concern by comparison. "It's fine," she assured him. "We're in this together." The simple acknowledgement visibly relaxed him. "Yes, we are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the late afternoon sun gild the snow-covered peaks. Devon was acutely aware of Jo beside her, his steady presence, the subtle cedar scent of his cologne, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers as he shifted. Physical proximity that once would have felt intrusive now provided an odd comfort. "I found something in town yesterday," Jo said eventually, reaching into his pocket. "It made me think of you." He produced a small velvet pouch, offering it without ceremony. Devon hesitated only briefly before accepting, tipping the contents into her palm. A delicate silver pendant emerged, a tiny camera, exquisitely detailed. "Your real camera's been gathering dust since we arrived," Jo explained. "I thought perhaps something more portable might inspire you until you're strong enough to handle your equipment again." The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just its beauty, but the recognition of what she'd been missing, caught Devon off guard. Photography had been her passion, her livelihood, her way of seeing the world. In the chaos of illness, that essential part of herself had been temporarily set aside. "Thank you," she managed, emotions tightening her throat. Joe smiled, the expression softening the strong angles of his face. "There's an excellent camera shop in the village. The owner speaks minimal English but seemed to understand my gestures well enough. When you're feeling up to it, perhaps we could visit, see if they have something lighter than your professional gear, but better than a phone camera." "I'd like that," Devon replied, slipping the pendant over her head. It nestled perfectly beside the moon necklace she still wore, past and present hanging together against her heart. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of Lillian's voice as she returned from her art session, chatting animatedly with her therapist in the garden below. "She's thriving here," Devon observed. "I've never seen her so unburdened." Joe followed her gaze to their daughter, who was gesturing excitedly at her painting. "Children are remarkably resilient when they feel secure. And right now she has everything she needs, her mother getting better, stability, and the knowledge that both her parents are fully present." "I've been thinking about what happens when we return," Devon said, giving voice to thoughts that had increasingly occupied her mind. "About Lillian's schooling, about where we'll live." "There's no rush to decide," Joe assured her. "The garden house is yours for as long as you want it. And there are excellent schools near the penthouse, if you'd prefer Lillian not return to her previous one." The careful way he phrased it, not pressuring, not assuming, yet quietly hoping, wasn't lost on Devon. This man who commanded corporate boardrooms approached their fragile family dynamic with a patience and sensitivity that continually surprised her. "I've been unfair to you," she said suddenly, the realization crystallizing as she spoke. "All these months, I've treated your presence in our lives as temporary, a necessity during crisis, but not permanent." Joe's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. "You had every reason to be cautious." "Maybe at first," Devon acknowledged, "but not anymore. Not after everything." She turned to face him fully. "You've been more than I could have asked for, Joe. More than Lillian could have hoped for in a father. And I've been holding back, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to grow tired of playing family man and return to your real life." "This is my real life," Joe said quietly, intensity burning beneath the simple words. "You and Lillian. Everything else, the company, the penthouse, all of it, those are just trappings. What matters is right here." The conviction in his voice silenced any lingering doubts. Devon had spent 7 years defining herself by her independence, by her ability to raise Lillian alone. But watching Joe with their daughter these past months had shown her what Lillian had been missing, and perhaps what Devon herself had been missing too. "When I was in the ICU," she said carefully, "before they took me into surgery, you said something. You said you needed me. Did you mean that, or was it just the moment?" Joe's gaze didn't waver. "I meant it. I still do." The simple confirmation hung between them, neither pushing for more nor retreating from its implications. Below, Lillian waved up at them, proudly displaying her painting of the mountains bathed in sunset colors. "Mom, Dad, look what I made!" "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Devon called back, waving. "We'll be right down." As they rose to join their daughter, Joe offered his arm, a courtesy for the stairs that still challenged Devon's recovering strength. She took it without hesitation, her hand resting comfortably in the crook of his elbow. "Joe," she said as they reached the door, "I meant what I said too. We're in this together, not just for Lillian's sake anymore." His smile, warm and genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes, was answer enough. As they descended to the garden where Lillian waited, Devon felt something unfurling within her chest, a sensation almost forgotten during long months of illness and fear. Hope. Not just for recovery, but for something she'd never allowed herself. To imagine a future where the fragile bonds forming between the three of them might strengthen into something lasting, something family-shaped. It wasn't a declaration of love, neither of them was ready for that leap, but as Lillian ran to meet them, painting held high like a trophy, Devon recognized it for what it was. A beginning. Chapter 9. Coming Home. Spring had transformed Manhattan by the time their private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport. Cherry blossoms dotted the parks in delicate pink clouds, and the harsh edges of the city seemed softened in the gentle April sunlight. It had been 4 months since they'd departed for Switzerland. 4 months of treatment, recovery, and the quiet rebuilding of trust between Devon and Joe. As their car crossed the George Washington Bridge, Lillian pressed her face to the window, pointing excitedly at familiar landmarks. "Look, Mom, the buildings are the same but different." Devon smiled, understanding exactly what her daughter meant. The skyline remained unchanged, yet everything felt altered, viewed through new eyes from a different perspective, rather like her life. In the front passenger seat, Joe spoke quietly with his driver about their arrival arrangements. Devon studied his profile, still struck by how familiar he had become. The strong line of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed slightly when concentrating, the small scar near his right ear from a childhood fall. Details she'd memorized without conscious intent during their months together. Dr. Müller had declared her officially in remission 2 weeks ago. Not cured, he'd cautioned, but winning the battle decisively. She would require maintenance therapy and regular monitoring, but the aggressive cancer that had nearly claimed her life was in retreat. Now came the question that had hovered unspoken between her and Joe as their departure date approached. What next? The garden house waited, Joe had assured her. So did her apartment in Brooklyn, which he'd continued paying for during their absence. "No pressure," he'd said the night before they left Switzerland. "You and Lillian make whatever choice feels right." His careful neutrality couldn't quite mask the hope in his eyes, hope that they would choose to stay, that the family unit forged in crisis might continue in recovery. Devon found herself equally hopeful, yet frightened by the implications of that hope. It was one thing to accept help when desperately ill, to allow boundaries to blur when survival hung in the balance. It was quite another to choose interdependence when independence was again viable. "We're home," Lillian announced as the car pulled up to Rankin Tower. "Dad, can we show Mum the surprise now?" Joe glanced back at Devon, amusement dancing in his eyes. "I think we should wait until we're upstairs, don't you?" Lillian bounced impatiently in her seat. "But it took forever, and Mum's going to love it." "Love what?" Devon asked, intrigued by their obvious conspiracy. "You'll see," Joe promised, offering his hand as the driver opened her door. Devon took it without hesitation, another small intimacy that had become natural during their time away. Touch between them remained largely platonic, supportive rather than romantic, but the careful distance she'd once maintained had gradually eroded, replaced by a comfortable physical ease. In the private elevator to the penthouse, Lillian could barely contain her excitement. "Close your eyes when we get to the roof garden, Mom. It's a surprise." Devon raised an eyebrow at Joe, who merely smiled, neither confirming nor denying his involvement in whatever scheme their daughter had concocted. When the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse living room, Devon was struck by subtle changes to the space she'd left months earlier. Fresh flowers brightened every surface. Family photos had been added to once austere shelves, and Lillian's artwork now adorned walls previously reserved for museum-quality pieces. Not a bachelor's showcase anymore, but a home. "This way." Lillian tugged Devon's hand, leading her toward the spiral staircase that accessed the roof garden. "Remember, close your eyes." Devon complied, allowing herself to be guided up the stairs, Joe's steadying hand at the small of her back. The scent of fresh air and growing things intensified as they reached the top, along with something else, a chemical smell she couldn't quite place. "Okay," Lillian announced. "Open them." Devon opened her eyes and gasped. The garden house where she'd spent her early recovery had been transformed. While the glass structure remained, its interior was now unrecognizable. The comfortable but generic living space had been replaced by a fully equipped photography studio, complete with professional lighting, backdrop systems, and a separate darkroom visible through an interior door. "Do you like it?" Lillian asked anxiously. "Dad let me help design it. I picked the colors." Devon moved forward in stunned silence, taking in details that spoke of careful planning and intimate knowledge of her needs. The ergonomic chair adjusted to accommodate lingering fatigue, the specialized tables positioned at precisely the right height, the storage system for lenses and equipment that mirrored the one she'd had in her former studio. On the main workbench sat her camera, the professional-grade Canon she'd thought left behind in Brooklyn, alongside several new lenses still in their boxes. A wall displayed enlarged prints of her best work, including several she recognized from her Brooklyn Art Council submission years ago that never received the recognition she'd hoped for. "How did you—" she began, turning to Joe. "We may have borrowed your keys to retrieve some things from your apartment," he admitted, and Lillian remembered which equipment you mentioned missing most. "I made a list," Lillian declared proudly. "Dad said we had to get everything exactly right, because artists need their special tools." Devon moved further into the studio, running her fingers over familiar equipment and new additions. The investment represented was substantial, but what moved her more was the thought behind each element, the awareness of her creative needs, the understanding that recovery meant more than physical healing. "The dark room is fully ventilated," Joe explained, following her gaze to the adjoining space, "and we installed special air purifiers to ensure the chemicals won't affect your recovery." Devon turned to him, emotion tightening her throat. "You did all this while managing Lillian's schooling and running your company from Switzerland?" Joe shrugged, uncharacteristically self-conscious. "I had help, and it gave us a project during your longer treatment days. We wanted you to have a reason to stay," Lillian said quietly, voicing the intention her father had carefully avoided stating directly. "So you could work here instead of going back to the other place." The simple honesty of a child, laying bare the hopes that adults wrapped in cautious neutrality. Devon knelt to her daughter's level, cupping her face gently. "It's beautiful. Lily Bean, the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." Relief washed over Lillian's features. "So you like it? You'll stay?" Devon glanced up at Joe, who watched them with carefully controlled hope in his eyes. "I think," she said slowly, "that we should discuss it as a family." Family. The word hung between them, weighted with possibility. Later, after Lillian had been tucked into bed in the room that was now undeniably hers, walls repainted her favorite shade of purple, ceiling adorned with the glow-in-the-dark stars from their Brooklyn apartment, Devon found Joe on the main terrace, nursing a glass of whiskey as he gazed out over the city. "She fell asleep almost immediately," Devon said, joining him at the railing. "I think the excitement finally caught up with her." Joe smiled. "She's been planning the studio reveal for weeks. I'm surprised she managed to keep it secret this long." A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that had become familiar. during long Swiss evenings after Lillian was in bed. Devon studied the city lights, finding her perspective literally and figuratively changed, looking out from the heights rather than up from the streets below. "The studio is incredible," she said finally. "More than incredible. It's exactly what I would have created for myself if resources were unlimited." "That was the goal," Joe replied simply. "For it to be yours in every sense." "But that's just it, Joe. It can't be truly mine if I didn't create it for myself." She turned to face him directly. "Please don't take this the wrong way. I'm deeply moved by your generosity, by the thought and care you put into it, but accepting it feels like accepting dependence," Joe finished for her, understanding evident in his expression. "Like trading your independence for comfort and security." Devon nodded, relieved he understood without taking offense. "For 7 years, I've defined myself by my ability to stand on my own, to provide for Lillian through my own efforts. I built a life where needing no one was a virtue. And now?" Joe asked quietly. "Now I understand there's another kind of strength in allowing yourself to need others, in accepting help, in building something together rather than alone." Devon took a deep breath. "I want to stay, Joe. I want Lillian to have both her parents under one roof. I want to see where this journey takes us, but I need to contribute, to maintain who I am in the process." Joe set down his glass, turning to face her fully. "What are you proposing?" "A partnership," Devon said with newfound clarity. "Not just as Lillian's parents, but in all aspects. I want to pay rent for the Garden House studio. I want to resume my career. I want to be your equal, not your charity case or your guest." A slow smile spread across Joe's face. "Equal partners." "Exactly. Then perhaps you should know that the Brooklyn Art Council called last week. They're interested in exhibiting your pre-illness work, the Urban Landscape series. Apparently, someone sent them your portfolio." Devon narrowed her eyes. "Someone?" Joe's smile turned slightly sheepish. "I may have made a few calls, but the interest is genuine, Devon. Your work stands on its own merit." Instead of the indignation she might once have felt, Devon found herself touched by his belief in her talent. "Equal partners means no more arranging things behind my back," she warned, but her tone held no real reproach. "Agreed," Joe said, offering his hand as though sealing a business deal. "Partners, in every sense." Devon took his hand, but instead of shaking it, she held it between both of hers. "Thank you, not just for the studio or the exhibition opportunity, but for understanding why independence matters to me. For seeing me as I am, not just as Lillian's mother or a person who was ill." Joe's fingers tightened around hers. "I've seen you clearly from the first moment, Devon Elizabeth. That night at the Rainbow Gardens, in the rain, the photographer who noticed what everyone else missed. The reference to their beginning, before misunderstandings and separation, before cancer and reunion, triggered a wave of emotion Devon hadn't expected. They stood at a crossroads now, their shared past and separate journeys converging into a possible future together. "We should go slowly," she cautioned, practical despite the quickening of her pulse. "For Lillian's sake, make sure this is sustainable before—" "Before?" Joe prompted when she didn't continue. Devon met his gaze steadily. "Before we consider becoming more than co-parents who live in the same building." The possibility hung between them, neither denied nor rushed toward. Joe lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles with a restraint that spoke volumes about his respect for her boundaries. "We have time," he said simply. "I'm not going anywhere." As the city lights glimmered around them, Devon felt the final pieces of her resistance soften and dissolve. Coming home hadn't been about returning to a physical place, but about arriving at this moment of clarity, understanding that true strength lay not in needing no one, but in choosing whom to need, whom to trust, whom to love, and standing beside Joe Rankin on a Manhattan terrace with their daughter sleeping peacefully inside, Devon Elizabeth found herself ready, finally, to make that choice. Chapter 10. A Love Reclaimed. The September sun slanted through Central Park's trees, turning ordinary scenes into tableaux of light and shadow that begged to be captured. Devon adjusted her camera settings, focusing on a young couple seated by the lake, their hands intertwined with the unself-conscious intimacy of those who have found their other half. 5 months had passed since their return from Switzerland. 5 months of rebuilding strength, of establishing new routines, of carefully navigating the evolving dynamics between herself and Joe. True to their agreement, they had moved forward as partners first, co-parents sharing a home while maintaining separate spaces, equals finding their footing in this unexpected life they were creating together. Devon's exhibition at the Brooklyn Art Council had been a resounding success, leading to commissions that allowed her to contribute meaningfully to household expenses, despite Joe's insistence it wasn't necessary. She'd purchased new equipment for the studio with her own earnings, gradually making the space truly hers, rather than a gift she'd passively received. More importantly, she'd regained her identity as an artist, not just as a cancer survivor or Lillian's mother. That reclamation of self had been essential to her healing, a fact Joe seemed to understand instinctively. "Caught you working on your day off," a familiar voice said behind her. Devon turned to find Joe approaching with Lillian, both carrying ice cream cones despite the mild weather. Their Saturday park outings had become a family tradition, one Lillian insisted upon even as she grew increasingly involved in school activities and friendships. "Just one shot," Devon defended herself with a smile, accepting the vanilla cone Joe offered. The light was too perfect to resist. "Mom's always working," Lillian declared with the dramatic eye roll she'd recently perfected. At 8 years old, she straddled the line between childhood and the beginnings of adolescence, occasionally testing boundaries while remaining fundamentally the old soul child they'd always known. "That's because Mom's an artist," Joe reminded her, settling on the blanket they'd spread beneath a sprawling oak. "Artists see the world differently. They notice what the rest of us miss." The echo of his words from 7 years earlier, spoken in a rain-soaked garden when they were strangers becoming something more, wasn't lost on Devon. From Joe's quiet smile, she knew he remembered too. "Dad, can I go see if Zoe is here? Her mom said they might come to the park today." Lillian's reconnection with her former classmate had been one of many threads connecting their new life with the old. "Stay where we can see you," Joe cautioned, watching as Lillian dashed toward the playground with the boundless energy of childhood. Alone. With Devon, he stretched out beside her on the blanket, close but not touching, the careful distance they still maintained in public, though private moments had grown increasingly intimate in recent weeks. "The hospital called," he said after a moment. "Your latest scans are clear. Dr. Forrest says you're officially in complete remission." Devon set down her camera, the news washing through her like sunlight. "You're sure? No trace of—" "None," Joe confirmed, his eyes reflecting her own relief and joy. She said, and I quote, "Ms. Elizabeth has kicked cancer's posterior quite thoroughly." A laugh escaped Devon, a free, unburdened sound that would have been impossible months earlier when the fear of recurrence shadowed every hopeful moment. "That doesn't sound like Dr. Forrest's vocabulary." "I may have paraphrased slightly," Joe admitted with a smile, "but the meaning stands. You did it, Devon. You did it. Not we. Not taking credit for his undeniable role in her recovery. This too was part of their careful dance. his recognition of her autonomy, her acknowledgement of his support, neither diminishing the other's contribution to the miracle of her health. "We should celebrate," Devon said, allowing her hand to rest lightly atop his on the blanket, one of the small intimacies they'd been sharing with increasing frequency. "Tell Lillian the good news." Joe nodded, but his expression held something beyond simple agreement, a barely contained anticipation that intrigued her. "Actually, I was hoping we might celebrate privately first, before telling Lillian. Marion offered to take her for a sleepover with Zoe tonight." Marion Williams, Zoe's mother, had become a friend to Devon in recent months, another piece of normalcy reclaimed as her health improved and social connections became possible again. "What did you have in mind?" Devon asked, curious about the slight nervous energy she sensed beneath Joe's usual composure. "Dinner," he said simply. "Just the two of us, at Rainbow Gardens." Devon stilled, the significance of the location immediately apparent. "The charity venue? Where we met?" Joe nodded. "It's still there, though under new management. I thought perhaps it was time to revisit our beginning, now that we know how the story continues." The suggestion held weight beyond a simple dinner invitation. Since their return from Switzerland, they had focused primarily on co-parenting, on establishing stability for Lillian, on Devon's recovery and career resurrection. The potential for romance had remained largely unaddressed, acknowledged but not actively pursued, until now. "I'd like that," Devon said softly, a gentle warmth blooming in her chest. Later, after dropping Lillian at the Williams home with promises to call before bedtime, Devon stood in the garden house, contemplating her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman who looked back at her had changed profoundly from the one who'd faced a similar mirror the night of the Rainbow Gardens gala 7 years earlier. Her hair had grown back in a different texture than before, softer, with a natural wave that framed her face in a way she'd come to appreciate. She'd kept it short by choice, finding the style suited her transformed sense of self. Her body, too, had changed, curves lost and partially regained, new scars mapping the journey of her illness and recovery. Yet the most significant changes weren't physical. The eyes that gazed back at her held a depth and clarity born of suffering and survival, of facing mortality and choosing life, of understanding that strength wasn't measured by independence, but by the courage to be vulnerable. The simple black dress she'd chosen revealed her collarbones and shoulders, areas once too thin from illness, but now restored to health. Around her neck hung both pendants, the moon from their first meeting, the camera from their Swiss sojourn, physical reminders of a journey that had come full circle. A knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. Joe stood outside, impeccable, in a charcoal suit that highlighted the silver at his temples, a relatively new development he attributed to the natural consequences of sudden fatherhood. His breath caught visibly when she opened the door, his gaze traveling from her face to her dress and back again with undisguised appreciation. "You're beautiful," he said simply, offering a small bouquet of wildflowers rather than conventional roses. Devon recognized them immediately, the same varieties that had grown in the Rainbow Gardens the night they met. "You remembered." "I remember everything about that night," Joe admitted, his voice low and intent. "The way the rain caught the garden lights, the sound of your laugh when I told you about my grandmother's superstitions, the exact moment I realized I'd met someone extraordinary." The sincerity in his eyes made denial impossible. Devon accepted the flowers with a smile, arranging them in a small vase before locking the garden house behind her. As they crossed the rooftop garden toward the private elevator, Joe offered his arm, a gesture that had become familiar during her recovery, but now carried new significance. Rainbow Gardens had indeed changed management, but the essence of the venue remained. Elegant, without pretension, intimate despite its size. As they were shown to a table near the famed gardens, Devon noted they were largely alone, with only a few other couples seated in distant corners. "Did you rent out the entire restaurant?" she asked, suspicion dawning as she noted the privacy of their location. Joe's smile was slightly sheepish. "Not the entire restaurant, just this section. I needed to do this right." Before Devon could question what this entailed, French doors were opened, revealing the garden terrace. Beyond, fairy lights illuminated the space just as they had 7 years earlier, but the sky above remained clear, no sign of the rain that had driven them to shelter in the gazebo on that fateful night. "Would you like to see the gardens?" Joe asked, offering his hand. Devon took it without hesitation, allowing him to lead her onto the terrace. The gazebo stood at its center, draped with soft lights that cast a gentle glow across the wooden structure. Inside, a small table had been set with champagne and strawberries, an echo of what they'd shared during their long conversation as rain drummed overhead years ago. "You've thought of everything," Devon observed, touched by the attention to detail, the careful recreation of their beginning. "Not quite everything," Joe admitted. "I can't make it rain on command, though I did consider having the sprinkler system adjusted for authenticity." Devon laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet garden. "That might have been excessive." "Perhaps," Joe agreed, guiding her to sit on the gazebo steps, the exact spot where they'd talked until dawn, where a catering staff member had captured the photograph Devon had kept all these years. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the weight of their shared history and potential future hanging between them like the delicate lights overhead. "I have something for you," Joe said finally, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Or rather, something to return to you." He withdrew a folded paper, carefully preserved despite its age. Devon recognized it immediately, the resume Lillian had presented in his office, the catalyst that had brought them back into each other's lives. "You kept it," she whispered, accepting the paper with reverent hands. "It changed my life," Joe said simply. "Before Lillian walked into my office that day, I had everything society claims matters: wealth, power, success, and yet I had nothing that truly did." Devon unfolded the childish resume, her throat tightening at the sight of Lillian's careful handwriting. "She was so determined to save me." "She succeeded," Joe observed quietly, "though perhaps not in the way she intended. She saved me too, Devon, from a half-life I didn't even recognize as incomplete until I saw you again." The raw honesty in his voice drew Devon's gaze from the paper to his face. The polished corporate mask he showed the world had fallen away completely, revealing the man beneath, vulnerable, sincere, and looking at her with undisguised love. "These past months," he continued, taking her hands in his, "watching you reclaim your health, your career, your independence, I've fallen in love with you all over again, not with memories or what might have been, but with who you are now, the fighter, the artist, the mother, the partner." Devon felt tears gathering, but they were different from the tears of fear or grief that had marked so much of their reunion. These were tears of recognition, of seeing and being seen completely and without reservation. "I never stopped loving you," she admitted, the truth she'd kept guarded finally finding voice. "Even when I thought I hated you for the announcement, for the life I imagined you were living without us. Some part of me remained connected to that night, to the man in the rain who saw me clearly when no one else did." Joe's hands tightened around hers. "I haven't been perfect in this second chance. I've overstepped, assumed, arranged things when I should have asked. Old habits of control that I'm still unlearning. And I've been stubborn, prideful, too quick." To interpret help as pity, Devon countered with a small smile. We're both works in progress. Progress I'd like to continue. Together. With deliberate movements, Joe shifted from the gazebo step to one knee before her, still holding her hands. Devon Elizabeth, I'm not asking you to need me. I'm asking for the privilege of walking beside you. As your partner, your equal, your love. Will you marry me? From his pocket, he produced not a conventional diamond, but a ring of twisted silver threads, holding a perfect miniature lens. An artist's engagement ring, uniquely suited to the photographer he was asking to share his life. The setting caught, the garden lights refracting them into miniature rainbows across Devon's palm. Devon studied the ring, then the man offering it. This complex, caring individual who had transformed from stranger to co-parent to essential presence in her life. The journey had been neither direct nor easy, marked by misunderstandings and illness, by pride and fear, by the gradual building of trust that could only come through shared struggle and mutual respect. Yes, she said simply. Not because Lillian needs us to be a traditional family, or because I need security, but because loving you feels like coming home. As Joe slipped the ring onto her finger, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, a gentle percussion on the gazebo roof that mirrored the rhythm of their beginning. They both looked up, matching expressions of wonder and amusement on their faces. "Did you arrange this too?" Devon asked, laughing as the shower intensified. Joe shook his head, equally amazed by the timing. "Some things are beyond even my considerable influence." He rose from his knee to sit beside her again, their shoulders touching in comfortable closeness as rain curtained around the gazebo. In the distance, a waiter peered concernedly toward them, but Joe waved him away with a reassuring gesture. "Last time we talked until dawn," Devon remembered, leaning into his side. "What shall we talk about tonight?" Joe's arms slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. "The future, perhaps. Though I'd rather show than tell." His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a claim. But as Devon responded, it deepened into something that spoke of patience rewarded, of passion tempered, but not diminished by time and trial. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly, years of restraint giving way to the promise of intimacy reclaimed. "We should tell Lillian tomorrow," Devon said, her head resting against his shoulder as they listened to the rain. "Though I suspect she's been expecting this for some time," Joe chuckled. "She asked me last week why I hadn't fixed things with you yet. Apparently our careful pacing has been frustrating to our 8-year-old matchmaker. She gets her impatience from her father," Devon teased, fingering her new ring. "And her determination from her mother," Joe countered, pressing a kiss to her temple. As the rain continued its gentle symphony on the gazebo roof, Devon thought, of all the moments that had led to this one, the chance meeting 7 years ago, the misunderstanding that separated them, Lillian's desperate attempt to save her mother, Joe's unwavering support through illness and recovery, and the slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust that had brought them full circle to where they began. Not a fairy tale of perfect people finding perfect happiness, but the messier, truer story of flawed individuals choosing each other despite, or perhaps because of, the difficulties they'd overcome together. The next morning, when they told Lillian over breakfast that they were getting married, her reaction was not the excitement they'd anticipated, but a serene satisfaction, as though they'd finally caught up to a conclusion she'd reached long ago. "I knew it," she declared, cutting her pancakes with methodical precision. "Ever since you started getting better in Switzerland, Mom. Dad looks at you the way Prince Naveen looks at Tiana in the movie." Joe raised an eyebrow at Devon, amusement dancing in his eyes. High praise indeed, being compared to a Disney prince. Actually, Lillian continued thoughtfully, I think I knew even before that. The day I went to your office, Dad. I had this feeling. What feeling, sweetheart? Devon asked, fascinated by her daughter's perception. Lillian considered the question with characteristic seriousness. Like I was finding something that was lost, like we were supposed to be together. You, me, and Dad. But something went wrong, and I had to fix it. The simple wisdom of childhood left both adults momentarily speechless. Joe reached across the table, taking Devon's hand in his, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of those who have found their way home after a long journey. Well, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, thank you for fixing it, Lillian, for bringing us back together. Lillian beamed, satisfaction evident in every line of her small face. You're welcome, but now can we get a dog? A family should have a dog. Devon laughed, the sound free and unburdened, the laugh of a woman who had faced death and chosen life, who had built walls and learned to lower them, who had reclaimed not just health but hope. We'll discuss it, she promised, exchanging a knowing look with Joe that suggested this was merely the first of many family negotiations to come. Outside, spring sunlight bathed the city in golden promise, touching skyscrapers and street corners alike with the same generous warmth. From the penthouse windows, Devon could see the rooftop garden where her studio stood, the place where she'd begun to reclaim her art, her identity, her future. Looking at Joe and Lillian, her family, gathered around a breakfast table on an ordinary Monday morning, Devon Elizabeth felt the final pieces of her heart slide into place. The light within her, once dimmed by illness and fear, now burned steady and true, illuminating a path forward she could never have imagined when a determined little girl walked into a Manhattan office with a handwritten resume and a desperate plea for help. Not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together, one day at a time, with patience and honesty, and the hard-won understanding that love, once lost and then reclaimed, was the most precious gift of all.